Before we begin, if you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Maggie's story travels. And if this story moves, you don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Now let's step back to 1874 to a dusty Texas town where a woman's life meant less than a man's pride, and one stranger's choice to stop would change two broken souls forever. She was beaten in the street, and the town watched one stranger refuse to look away. The dust tasted like copper. Margaret Cole couldn't tell anymore if it was the dirt or her own blood filling her mouth. Her cheek pressed against the rough planks of the boardwalk, the warped grain of old pine just inches from her nose. Somewhere above her, a man was still talking. His voice carried the smooth certainty of someone who had never been told no, had never been stopped, never made to answer for a single thing he had done in his 40 years of walking this earth like he owned it, which in Stillwater, Texas, he more or less did. You see what happens, Harlan Voss said loud enough for the whole of Main Street to hear, when a woman forgets her place. Maggie couldn't see him. Her left eye had swollen shut somewhere around the third blow. The right eye showed her only the street, the dark stains spreading beneath her split lip, the boots of the man who had done this standing 2 feet away polished, despite the September dust. Town boots. Rich man's boots. The boots of a man who had never once had to run from anything. Her ribs screamed with every shallow breath. She had stopped trying to get up after the fourth kick. Anybody got something to say? Voss's voice carried a performer's lift, inviting the crowd the way a preacher invited an amen. Anybody here think this woman deserves better than what she got? Silence answered him. Not the silence of an empty street, the thick, deliberate quiet of people who were there, who were watching, who were choosing every second to say nothing. Maggie could feel them at the edges of her fading vision. Shopkeepers standing in their doorways, women clutching their children back from the spectacle, cowboys leaning against hitching posts with the studied nonchalance of men pretending they had seen nothing interesting. She had lived in Stillwater for 14 months, long enough to understand that silence was its own kind of violence. Her husband Thomas had understood that too at the end. Thomas Cole had come to Texas from Tennessee the way a lot of men had come west after the war, carrying hope, like a lantern in both hands, convinced that space and distance and hard work could build something new from the wreckage of everything the years had burned down. He had been a good man, gentle, possessed of an optimism that the frontier had no particular patience for. He had opened a small dry goods store on the south end of Main Street. 3 months after they arrived, he had discovered something he was not supposed to discover: a ledger left carelessly in a back room by a man who had grown too comfortable with his own power to bother hiding his crimes. Numbers that didn't add up honestly. Land transactions that had no business being what they claimed to be. The signatures of men whose names meant something in this territory attached to figures that would have meant prison if a federal examiner ever saw them. Thomas had written a letter to the Territorial Land Office in Austin. He had told Maggie it was nothing, just a business matter, just a precaution. He had smiled when he said it, the way he always smiled when he was trying to protect her from worry. Harlan Voss had found out about the letter within the week. Thomas died on a Tuesday morning in July, in the back room of their store from injuries sustained in what the sheriff's report called a street altercation. The men who had beaten him were never identified. No witnesses came forward. Voss had been seen at his saloon all evening. 3 men confirmed it, and all 3 of them owed Voss money. The store went to creditors within a month, and Maggie had been left with nothing but the clothes she wore, and the knowledge that the town she lived in had watched her husband die the same way it was watching her die now, with careful, practiced indifference. She had tried. God knew she had tried. She had offered to sew, to cook, to keep accounts, to do laundry, any honest work that would let her pay her way while she figured out what came next. But Stillwater was not the kind of town that made room for a widow with no family and no man to speak for her. The respectable households didn't want her near their children. The saloon owners wanted her for things she would not do. And men like Harlan Voss, men with money and influence, and the casual confidence of those who had never faced real consequence, they wanted her to understand something fundamental about her situation. A woman alone in a place like this belonged to whoever took her first. She had told him no. The first time 2 months ago, when he had cornered her behind the general store and offered her a room above the Lucky Diamond in exchange for her company. She had told him no politely carefully the way you told a dangerous animal that you were not a threat. The second time last month when he had found her on the road outside town and grabbed her wrist. She had told him no and wrenched herself free. This morning when he had come to the boarding house where she was staying on credit, she couldn't pay, and put his hands on her without asking. She had told him no and slapped him hard enough to leave a mark. That had been 2 hours ago. He had left her there, his face dark with something beyond rage, and she had been foolish enough to think perhaps it was over. Perhaps he had decided she wasn't worth the trouble. Harlan Voss did not let things go. He had found her an hour later, walking toward the edge of town, with everything she owned in a sack over her shoulder, $3.40, sewn into the hem of her dress and exactly nowhere to go. He had come with 4 men. They had the look of men who were about to do something terrible and knew no one was going to stop them. She had tried to run. She hadn't made 10 feet. They had dragged her into the middle of Main Street, and Voss had made a spectacle of it. He had announced her crimes to the gathered crowd, that she was a thief, that she was a woman of loose character, that she had assaulted him and stolen from his establishment. All lies. Lies delivered with the absolute confidence of a man whose word outweighed hers by 1,000 to 1. Then he had hit her. The first blow had been open-handed across her face, hard enough to snap her head sideways and fill her mouth with copper. The second had been a fist to her stomach, folding her in half, dropping her to her knees. After that, it had become a rolling blur of boots and pain, while Voss narrated her punishment like a sermon, and the town of Stillwater, Texas stood around and watched a woman be beaten half to death on a Tuesday morning in September of 1874 and said absolutely nothing. "Get up," Voss said above her, now impatience replacing performance. "Get up so we can finish this proper." She didn't move. Couldn't. Her body had stopped taking instructions somewhere around the 5th kick. I said, a boot connected with her shoulder, rolling her partially onto her back. The sky above her was bleached bone white, with heat blinding even through her one good eye. She let it close. She waited for what came next. It didn't come. Instead, she heard something new, the jingle of a bridle, the measured, unhurried footfall of a horse walking up the center of the street, and then a voice low and shaped by years of dust and distance and hard living that cut through the September heat like a blade through rotted wood. "That's enough." 2 words, simple and absolute, the way a fact is simple and absolute, the kind of statement that doesn't leave room for argument, that doesn't invite discussion, that assumes its own authority without asking permission. Maggie forced her good eye open. A man sat on a big bay horse at the edge of the crowd, maybe 20 feet from where she lay in the dirt. He was tall in the saddle broad through the shoulders, wearing clothes that had seen hard use and harder country. His hat sat low on his brow, casting the upper half of his face in shadow, but she could see his eyes from where she lay. Gray. Cold and clear as winter sky before a storm. He was looking at Harlan Voss the way a man looks at a rattlesnake. He is still deciding whether to shoot. Voss turned, and Maggie watched something happen in his face, watched the irritation curdle into something more careful, more calculated. He knew this man. Whatever he knew, it was enough to make him think before he spoke. "This isn't your concern, Calloway." Calloway. The name meant nothing to Maggie, but it clearly meant something to Voss, and to the crowd she could feel the quality of the silence, shift tension replacing the comfortable indifference of bystanders. "Seems like it is." The man called Calloway hadn't raised his voice. Somehow it carried anyway, flat and certain as a rifle shot. "Seems like you're beating a woman in the street and calling it justice. This is town business. Legal business." Voss's hand had drifted toward the pistol at his belt, not quite touching it, but close. "She's a thief and worse. She struck me. Under territorial law, under any law worth a damn, you're a coward." The crowd drew breath as one. Voss's face went dark red. "You better watch your mouth. You don't have the reputation you used to Calloway. You're just a rancher now, a broke one from what I hear. You've got no authority here." "Don't need authority to stop a beating." Calloway shifted slightly in the saddle. The movement was small, almost nothing, but it made his coat fall open just enough to show the revolver on his hip. "Not a threat, just a fact. Don't need permission to call a thing what it is. You making this your fight already is." Calloway's gaze dropped to Maggie for the first time, and something moved through those gray eyes, not pity. Something harder than that. Recognition, maybe. The look of a man who had seen this particular scene before and hated what it said about the world. Moment I rode into town and saw you kicking a woman half to death while grown men stood around watching. Voss laughed, but it came out forced. So what are you going to take her, make her your problem? If that's what it takes. She's nothing, Calloway. No family, no money, no use to anyone. You want to waste yourself on a dead woman walking and that's your funeral. Then we're done here. Calloway dismounted in one smooth motion, landing light despite his size. He crossed the space between them with the rolling gait of a man more at home on horseback than on foot. He didn't stop until he stood between Harlan Voss and the woman bleeding in the dirt. You got something else to say, he said quietly. Say it now, otherwise step back. For a long moment, Voss didn't move. His hand hovered near his gun. Maggie could see the calculations running behind his eyes. Reputation, risk, the arithmetic of witnesses and consequences. Finally, slowly, his hand dropped. She's yours then. Your problem. He turned away, dismissing them both with the contempt of a man who intended to circle back when the odds were better. Don't come crying when she steals from you. Get out of my sight, Calloway said quietly, before I stop being polite. Voss opened his mouth, thought better of it, turned on his heel and walked away, his four men falling in behind him, and the crowd dissolved with the speed of people who had suddenly remembered pressing business elsewhere. Within 2 minutes, the street was empty, except for the man kneeling beside her in the dust. Up close, Jesse Calloway was older than she had thought. From a distance, maybe 40, maybe past it. His face was weathered deep, carved by sun and wind and years of living rough. A scar ran from his left eyebrow up into his hairline, silver white against tan skin. Several days of dark stubble going gray at the jaw. But his eyes, when they met hers, held something she had not expected to find in a stranger's face. Kindness. Not the performative kindness of a man who wanted something in return. The quiet and sentimental kind, the kindness of someone who had been hurt enough to understand what hurt looked like in another person. Can you hear me? He asked. She managed a small nod. The movement sent fresh spikes of pain through her skull. Good. He pulled off his bandana and pressed it gently against the worst of the bleeding on her face. I'm going to get you out of here. Get you somewhere safe. Can you stand? Don't know, she whispered. Her voice came out, broken and raw, barely recognizable as her own. That's all right, we'll figure it out. He slipped one arm under her shoulders and the other beneath her knees and lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. She felt her body protest, ribs screaming, head swimming, but his grip was steady and careful, adjusted instinctively every time she flinched. I've got you, Jim, he said, low and even. You're going to be all right. She wanted to believe him. She wanted more than she had wanted almost anything in a long time to trust that certainty in his voice. But trust was a currency she had spent down to nothing over 14 months in Stillwater, and she couldn't simply will it back into existence. Why, she managed, as he carried her toward his horse. The word came out barely above a whisper. Why, help me. He glanced down at her, and for just a moment, she saw something break through the weathered exterior. Something that looked like pain, like an old wound reopened, like memory. Because nobody helped someone I loved once, he said quietly, and I've regretted it every day since. He settled her carefully onto his horse, then swung up behind her. His arm came around her waist, holding her steady against his chest. She felt the solid warmth of him at her back, felt for the first time in longer than she could count. Something that the past 14 months had made her forget was even possible. Safe. Where are you taking me? My ranch, about an hour's ride. He turned the horse away from the center of town, away from the Lucky Diamond Saloon, and the general store, and the boarding house, and all the closed doors of Stillwater. You can rest there, heal, and when you're ready, we'll figure out what comes next. I can't pay you. Didn't ask you to. He nudged the horse into a slow walk, mindful of every jolt. All I'm asking is that you hold on and don't die on me. Think you can do that? She didn't answer. Couldn't make that kind of promise when she wasn't sure it was in her power to keep. But she leaned back against him and closed her eye and let herself be carried away from Stillwater, from the town that had watched her beaten and said nothing, from the life that had cost her everything and given her back only dust. Behind them, the town shrank to nothing. Ahead, the hills rose brown and endless under the white September sky. and between them, a woman with nothing left and a man still running from something he couldn't outrun, rode towards something neither of them could yet name. The ride passed in fragments. Maggie drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of motion and heat, and the steady rhythm of the horse beneath her, but nothing solid enough to hold. Once she surfaced and realized the light had shifted, they were climbing now into rougher country, where the air smelled of cedar and dry grass and something faintly like rain, though the sky was clear. Another time she felt water at her lips and drank without opening her eyes, trusting the hand that held the canteen. Mostly she just heard. Every step the horse took sent fresh complaints through her ribs. Her face throbbed in time with her heartbeat, and beneath the physical pain, a deeper ache, the kind that couldn't be explained by boots or fists. The ache of knowing she had been completely alone in that street, that if this man had ridden through town an hour later, or an hour earlier, or by a different road entirely, she would have died in the dust of Main Street and been swept away before sundown and forgotten before the week was out. Almost there, Calloway said at one point, his voice a low rumble at her back. Just a little further. When they finally stopped, he dismounted and lifted her down with the same careful strength he had shown in town. Maggie forced her eye open and took in what she could. A house simple, sturdy, built from rough-cut timber with a wide porch and a stone chimney. Beyond it, a barn, several outbuildings, corrals holding a half-dozen horses. The bones of a working ranch, though one that had been running lean for a while. The fence needed mending in places. The porch boards wanted replacing. But everything that was there was solid, built to last by someone who understood that the land didn't reward shortcuts. "I know it's not much," Calloway said, carrying her toward the door. "It's solid," she said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "Solid is enough." He pushed through the front door into a large main room, kitchen, and living space together, the way ranch houses always were, with a wide stone hearth and a heavy table and chairs built for use rather than company. Everything was clean but spare, a place where someone lived but hadn't quite let themselves inhabit. He carried her to a small bedroom off the main room and laid her on a narrow bed with a gentleness that surprised her every time. Then he lit a lamp against the gathering afternoon shadow and sat down in the chair beside the bed. "I'm going to look at your injuries," he said. "Some of them are going to need tending. I'll be as careful as I can, but it's going to hurt." "Already hurts," she said. "I know. I'm sorry." He examined her the way a man examines a problem, methodically, without flinching from what he found. His hands were rough with decades of calluses, but moved with a gentleness that felt practiced. Field medicine, she thought. He had done this before in some other life. "Broken cheekbone, maybe," he said. "Your eye should clear. It's swollen, not damaged. Split lip will heal on its own." He moved carefully to her ribs, and she clenched her jaw against the sound that wanted to come out when he probed along her side. "2 broken ribs, maybe 3. Nothing I can do about those except wrap them and tell you not to move much for the next few weeks." "I've been in worse shape," she said, though she wasn't sure that was true. He said nothing to that. He went to a cabinet and returned with clean cloth, a basin of water, and a bottle of whiskey. He offered her the whiskey first. She drank without hesitation, coughing at the burn, grateful for the warmth that followed it down. For the next hour, she existed in a world of methodical pain, cleaned wounds and wrapped ribs, and the careful tending of a man who did not look away from damage, but did not treat it as anything but something to be fixed. When he was finally done, he covered her with a blanket and stood. "Sleep," he said. "Tomorrow will be hard. You'll need your strength." "Why are you doing this?" The question came out barely above a whisper, but she had to ask. She had to understand it, because understanding was the only tool she had left. Calloway was quiet for a long moment. He sat back down in the chair, his hands clasped loosely between his knees, his gaze somewhere past the lamp. "I had a wife," he said finally, "and a daughter. We had a spread in Kansas, nothing grand, but it was ours. There was a man in the county, wealthy, connected through the right people, mean, underneath the money in the way that men get mean when nobody's ever said no to them." He paused. "He wanted our land, made offers. We said no. One day he came with his men while I was out working the back pasture." His jaw worked. The lamp threw long shadows across his face. "When I got back, the house was gone. Both of them were gone." A long silence. The whole county knew what he'd done, but he had lawyers and money and friends in the right offices, and I was just a farmer with a temper and no proof. Nobody would testify. Nobody would help. He walked free. Maggie felt tears on her cheeks, though she couldn't have said exactly when she'd started crying. I hunted him for 3 years. Calloway continued, his voice flat and precise, as if reading from a document. Found him in Colorado, put a bullet in him, and watched him die. He looked at her then and she saw the truth of it, the guilt, the righteous emptiness, the specific hollowness of a man who had gotten what he wanted and discovered it changed nothing fundamental. Then I ran, changed my name, bought this land and built this place and told myself I could leave it all behind. But you can't. No. He looked at her steadily. When I saw you in that street, saw you lying there, saw those men standing around watching, I saw Sarah, my wife. I saw her dying while people stood by and chose not to see. And I knew I couldn't. Something shifted in his expression, not softness exactly, but the particular hardness of a man making a decision he has been postponing for years. I couldn't be one of the people who looked away. The room was quiet for a long time after that. Outside, a horse nickered softly. Wind moved through the eaves. I'm sorry, Maggie said, for what happened to your family. And I'm sorry for what happened to yours. He stood, moved toward the door. Sleep now. I'll be in the next room. Mr. Calloway. He paused in the doorway. Thank you, she said, for stopping, for seeing me. He nodded once, brief and certain, and left the room. Maggie lay in the darkness of the strange room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling around her, the distant comfort of someone sitting watch in the next room. She should have been afraid. She should have been planning her next move, questioning his motives, preparing herself to run at the first sign that this kindness was conditional. But she was too broken for suspicion tonight. She closed her eye and let sleep take her. And for the first time in 14 months, she didn't dream of Thomas dying in her arms and apologizing for it. Morning came with birdsong and the smell of coffee. She woke slowly, swimming up through layers of pain towards something she couldn't immediately identify. It took her a moment to place it, the absence of dread, the specific relief of waking without immediately cataloging threats. Her body quickly reminded her of everything else. Every part of her that Voss's boots had found announced itself with detailed complaint when she tried to move. She forced herself upright in the stages, gripping the iron headboard, breathing through the worst of it. The door was open. Through it, she could see the main room Calloway at the stove, his back to her, moving with the quiet efficiency of a man who had been alone long enough that his morning routine required no thought. Someone had left a glass of water on the table beside her bed, and a dress, clean, simple cotton, not hers. She got herself to the edge of the bed, stood. The room tilted once and then steadied. She made it to the doorway under her own power, which felt like more of an accomplishment than it should have. Calloway turned the moment she appeared. He crossed the room in 3 steps, hands out. Easy, don't push it. I need the privy, she said, hating how thin her voice sounded. He helped her outside without comment, waited at a respectful distance, helped her back to a chair at the table. He brought her coffee, strong enough to strip paint the way ranch coffee always was, and eggs and bacon, and she ate slowly, each bite its own small negotiation with her body. But the food was good, and she was hungry enough that she worked through all of it. The dress, she said, when she had enough coffee in her to frame sentences. Where did it come from? It was my wife's. He said it without particular inflection, a fact, not an invitation. Been in a trunk for 10 years. I thought she'd want it used. Maggie looked down at the simple fabric. Plain, practical. The kind of dress a woman wore when she was about the business of living rather than being looked at. She smoothed it with one hand. I'll take care of it. It's yours. They ate in silence after that, and Maggie used the time to study him. He looked tired. He had probably not slept, but there was a steadiness to him that she found against all her better instincts reassuring. He moved without waste, sat without fidgeting, did not fill silence with words it didn't need. What happens now? She asked finally. He set down his coffee. That depends on you. You're welcome here as long as you need to heal, to rest, to figure out your next step. When you're ready to move on, I'll give you money and provisions for wherever you're going. He paused. Or if you want to stay, I could use help around the place. I run cattle, but I'm carrying most of the work alone. I could use someone for the house, the cooking, the 1,000 things that don't get done when there's only one pair of hands. I'd pay you fair wages, same as I'd pay any hand. She looked at him across the table. Why would you do that? You don't know anything about me. I know you told Harlan Voss no. He met her eyes. I know you didn't deserve what happened to you. That's enough. What if he comes looking for me? Then he deals with me. No bravado in it, just statement of fact like explaining the weather. You're not afraid of him. I've got nothing left to lose, he said. That tends to change the arithmetic. He stood and collected the plates. Think about it. You don't need to decide today. Your only job right now is getting better. After he rode out to check his cattle, Maggie sat at the table alone and looked through the window at the hills rolling away in every direction, brown and vast and indifferent, in the way that open country is indifferent, asking nothing and promising nothing, and making no apologies for either. She thought about Stillwater, about Thomas, about the 14 months since she had buried him, the slow grinding erosion of a person being worn away by poverty and exclusion, and the daily accumulation of doors closed in her face. And she thought about what it would mean to stop running, what it would mean to stay somewhere and let it become tentatively, carefully, a place that was hers. She stood slowly, made her way back to the bedroom, lay down and pulled the blanket over herself. Outside the window, the September wind moved through the grass in long, slow waves. She closed her eye and let sleep take her again, and this time she dreamed of nothing at all. The first weeks of her recovery passed in a rhythm of sleep and small progresses. Calloway kept his distance in the ways that mattered and showed up in the ways that were necessary. He was there when she needed help walking there, when she woke from the occasional nightmare, with her heart hammering against her healing ribs there, with food at regular intervals without making a production of the care it took to prepare it. He did not ask her about her past, did not press for the details of Thomas's death or the months that had followed. He seemed to understand, in the way of someone who had their own unspoken things, that some histories needed time before they could be told. She started helping around the house in the second week despite his protests. You said I could earn my keep, she reminded him. You're still healing. I'm always going to be healing from something. She picked up the broom. Might as well be useful while I do it. He watched her sweep the kitchen floor with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between surprise and a kind of wondering, as if he had forgotten that a house could be more than just a place where a person existed. She began to bring order to the neglected corners, to wash curtains and reorganize the kitchen and make small adjustments that said in the language of domestic things that this was a place worth inhabiting. It's starting to look like a home, he said one afternoon, surprising her. It is a home, she said. It's just needed someone to remember that. The evenings were when they talked, not about the things that mattered most, not yet, but around them. She asked him about the ranch, about his cattle, about what he grew and what he needed. He explained the land's particular character, where water was scarce, where the grass ran thick, how the seasons moved through this part of Texas with a different rhythm than the Tennessee she had grown up in. He taught her to read weather and the color of the sky. He explained cattle with the patient expertise of someone who had learned to find meaning in whatever work was in front of him. One evening, watching the sunset paint the hills in long stripes of amber and violet, she asked him about Sarah. He was quiet for long enough that she thought she had gone too far. She was stronger than me, he said finally. His voice was level, but she heard what was under it. In most of the ways that mattered, she could outwork any man on the farm, but she never let the hard country make her hard, never lost her gentleness. A pause. Emma looked just like her. Same dark hair, same way of tilting her head when she was thinking. She used to follow me around, asking questions about everything. Why do chickens have feathers? Why does the sky turn red at night? Why do cows never look where they're going? Maggie smiled despite herself. Did you have answers? Not always, but I tried. His jaw tightened slightly. She was 6 years old. The silence that followed was the kind that didn't need filling. I think about her, he said at last. Every day I think about Emma. Sometimes he stopped, looked out at the hills. Sometimes I wonder. They never found her body after the fire. They said she must have been inside, that there was nothing left. But they never, he exhaled slowly, never found proof. I told myself for years it was just the kind of thing a man tells himself to avoid the truth, that I was holding on to nothing. He said nothing more. Didn't need to. Maggie said, I'm sorry, and meant it the way you can only mean it when you have lost someone yourself, not as a formality, but as a recognition. an acknowledgement of what loss costs, what it takes from a person that never fully grows back. They sat in the dark after the sun went down and the first stars came out, and neither of them felt the need to speak. 3 weeks after Calloway had lifted her from the dirt of Main Street, a rider came up the road fast enough to set the horses in the corral moving. Maggie was in the kitchen when she heard hooves. She went still, old reflex, the instinct of someone who had spent months learning to read approaching sounds as threats. Through the window, she watched Calloway come out of the barn and set down his tools with the practiced unhurriedness of a man who had learned to look calm while measuring danger. The rider was young, not much past 20, lean and weathered, wearing the clothes of a working cowboy. He dismounted before the horse had fully stopped, which told her something. His horse was blown. He had been riding hard and long. Calloway met him in the yard. She couldn't hear the conversation from the kitchen. She watched the young man speak, watched Calloway's face go still. In the particular way it went still when he was containing a reaction. After a minute, Calloway turned and looked toward the house. He caught her eye through the window and tilted his head slightly. "Come out." She dried her hands and went. "This is Will Donovan," Calloway said as she came to stand beside him. "He says he's got something to tell us both." Donovan looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across his face, something she couldn't quite name, but that pulled at her the way a half-remembered song pulls at you, familiar in a way you can't immediately place. "Mrs. Cole," he said, "I don't know if you'll remember me. I was in Stillwater 6 months ago. I worked a season at the Miller place before I hired on with the Circle D." She looked at him more carefully. The lean face, the way he held himself. Something was right on the edge of recognition, just past where she could reach it. "I knew your husband," he said. The words landed like a stone, dropped into still water. "I knew Thomas Cole." His voice was steady, but it cost him something to keep it that way. "Knew him well. He stopped. Tried again. He was my brother, Mrs. Cole, my half-brother. We had the same father, different mothers. He was 10 years older than me. I didn't find out he existed until I was 14, and by then he'd already gone to Tennessee and built his own life." Something shifted in his expression. "But we wrote letters, kept in touch. When he went west, I followed eventually. I wanted to find him, introduce myself proper. I didn't get there in time." Maggie stood very still. "I was in Stillwater," Will Donovan said, "when Thomas died." The words hit her in the chest like a fist. "I was there. I saw it." His voice dropped. "I saw who did it. Saw the men Voss sent, saw it happen, and He stopped. The muscle in his jaw worked. "I ran. I told myself I had no proof that speaking up would just get me killed too, that there was nothing I could do. I told myself all the things a coward tells himself to sleep at night." He met her eyes. "I've been living with that ever since." Maggie said nothing. The world had gone very quiet around the edges. "I tried to find you after. Heard you'd stayed in Stillwater, tried to keep the store going. By the time I circled back, you were gone. Or that's what I thought. Then I heard about what happened in town 3 weeks ago. Heard Calloway had taken a woman out to his ranch." He looked between them. "I spent 2 days getting up the nerve to come out here and tell you this. I don't know what good it does now, but you deserve to know the truth about how Thomas died. And you deserve to know." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded envelope, worn at the edges, the paper gone soft with handling. "He asked me to hold on to this. Said it was insurance. Said if anything happened to him, I should make sure it got to the right people." He held it out to Maggie. She took it, opened it with hands that were steadier than she expected. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper, and even before she fully opened it, she recognized the neat, careful handwriting. Thomas's handwriting. She read it once, then again. Then she looked up at Jesse Calloway, who had been reading over her shoulder, and she saw in his face that he had understood exactly what she had understood. It was a copy. Thomas had made a copy of the land records. He had found the fraudulent transactions, the falsified signatures, the systematic theft that Harlan Voss had been running for years through the county land office. Names, dates, figures. The kind of evidence that could end a man's freedom and his influence in a single courtroom. The name at the bottom of one transaction in a different hand from Voss's witnessed and countersigned was Sheriff Ned Holt. They sat at the kitchen table that night, the three of them, the lamp burning low between them. Thomas Cole's letter spread flat on the wood. Will Donovan had his hands wrapped around a coffee cup he wasn't drinking from. He had the look of a man who had been carrying something for so long that he had stopped noticing the weight until the moment he put it down and then couldn't quite believe how much lighter the air felt. Maggie had read the letter 4 times. She knew it now the way she knew the Lord's Prayer. She set it on the table and smoothed it once with her palm, a gesture that had nothing to do with the paper. "He never told me," she said, "about any of it. He said it was a business matter, a precaution." She looked at the window at the darkness outside. "He was trying to protect me." "That's Thomas," Will said quietly. "Always thought he could carry things alone if he just got his shoulders wide enough under them." He wasn't wrong to be careful. Calloway studied the document without touching it. If Voss found out Thomas had this, he did find out. Maggie's voice was flat. "Not about the copy, I think, but about the letter to the land office in Austin, about the fact that Thomas was talking to someone." She pressed her fingers together. "That's why they killed him. Not because of a debt, because he was going to expose them." The room was very quiet. "Voss and Holt both," Calloway said. "Holt's signature is right there. He's been in this from the beginning. That's why nobody investigated Thomas's death. That's why the witnesses all remembered being somewhere else. The man running the investigation was the man with the most to lose if it went anywhere." Will Donovan set down his cup. "I should have spoken. When Thomas died, I should have gone to someone, found the federal office, done something." "You were one man with no proof," Maggie said. Not warmly, not coldly, just the truth. "They would have buried you next to him and called it another altercation." "Maybe." He looked at the table. "Or maybe I was just afraid." "You're here now," Calloway said. He said it without judgment, but also without reassurance, just observation. "And now we have the proof. We have a copy of a document that Thomas made," Maggie said carefully. "We'd need to get it to someone who could act on it. A federal examiner, the Territorial Land Office." She paused. "Thomas's original letter may have been intercepted. Voss finding out about it so quickly suggests it was. But if we could get this copy to Austin, Voss will move first." Calloway leaned back in his chair. "He doesn't know about this copy. He'd have found it when he went through your things, or come for it before now if he did. But he knows you survived. He knows I'm involved. And he's not the kind of man who lets things sit." He looked between them. "We have time, but not a lot of it. We need to decide what we're doing and do it before he decides what he's doing." Will Donovan looked at Maggie. "What do you want to do?" She thought about Thomas, about his handwriting on that piece of paper, the careful, even letters of a man who had been thorough, even in secret, who had thought ahead even when afraid. She thought about 14 months of watching his dream dissolve into debt and dust, while the man who had killed him walked free and fat and utterly unconcerned. "I want it to matter," she said. "I want Thomas's death to count for something." "Then we use it," Calloway said. "We get that document to someone with the authority to act on it, and we use it to bring Voss down properly. Not a bullet in a back alley through a court in front of witnesses on the record." He looked at the paper. "But we do it carefully, and we do it together." Will Donovan nodded slowly. "I'm in, for whatever that's worth." "It's worth something," Maggie said. And she meant it not as forgiveness, exactly not yet, but as an acknowledgement of the fact that he was here, that he had come, that some debts were paid in installments, and this was the first one. In the days that followed, the ranch absorbed Will Donovan the way practical places absorb useful people, without ceremony but completely. He knew cattle. He knew horses with the particular ease of a man who had spent more time in their company than in any human settlement. And he and Calloway fell into an unspoken working rhythm, almost immediately, the kind that develops between men who understand land and animals and the specific demands of keeping a place running without needing to talk about any of it. Maggie watched this from the edges and found herself grateful. She was healing. Not fast. 3 broken ribs do not negotiate with impatience, but steadily in the way of a person whose body has more reason to fight back than to give up. She was back in the kitchen fully by the end of the 3rd week, and by the 4th she had reclaimed the garden behind the house, which had been choked with weeds and wanted serious attention. She was digging out a particularly stubborn root one morning when Calloway came to lean on the fence at the garden's edge, watching her work. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know." She kept digging. "I want to. It's satisfying clearing out what doesn't belong." She glanced up. There's something honest about it. You put in the work, you see the result. He was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something? You can try. He looked at the hills. What was he like, Thomas? She sat back on her heels and considered the question. Nobody had asked her that in a very long time. Most people in Stillwater had wanted to talk around Thomas's death, his debts, the inconvenient fact of his widow. Nobody had asked who he had been while he was alive. He was the most genuinely optimistic person I ever met, she said. Not naive, he understood the world clearly enough. He just refused to let it be the whole story. He thought that if you worked hard and treated people fairly and kept faith with what you believed in, eventually the scales would balance. She paused. It didn't work out that way for him. No. But I don't think he was wrong exactly. I think he just ran into someone who had decided the scales didn't apply to them. She turned the earth in her hands. He would have liked this wide open country room to build something. She looked at the hills. He always said the West was where a person could start over. He was right about that, Calloway said. She looked at him then. Jesse. He turned at the use of his given name the first time she had used it and met her eyes. Tell me about Emma. Something moved across his face. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might refuse or deflect the way he had deflected so many things. Then he came around the fence and sat down on the ground beside the garden, his arms resting on his knees, his gaze on the middle distance. She had this laugh, he said. Big laugh for a 6-year-old. You could hear it from across the field. She'd get started and he made a helpless gesture. She couldn't stop. Sarah used to say she laughed like she was afraid laughter was rationed and she needed to use her share before they ran out. His voice softened. She never walked anywhere, always running, always moving, like she was certain there was something just over the next hill that she was going to miss if she didn't hurry. He stopped. Rain had threatened all morning, and now a few drops came tentative feeling their way, the way rain does in dry country when the land hasn't had it in a while. I told you, he said, that they didn't find a body, that I've told myself for years it was just a man in grief looking for something to hold on to. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Some nights I still think. He stopped himself, shook his head. It doesn't matter what I think. It was 10 years ago. If she had survived. He didn't finish the sentence. Maggie thought about Thomas lying in that back room with his eyes already going, telling her he was sorry for bringing her here. Some griefs were so settled into a person that you couldn't separate them from the person anymore. They had become the same substance. It matters what you think, she said quietly. Just because you can't prove a thing doesn't mean it stops being true to you. He looked at her sideways. Something in his expression shifted slight careful, like a door that had been locked for a very long time, moving just slightly on its hinges. The rain found its confidence then and came down properly, and they sat there in the vegetable garden in the rain for a minute before both of them had the same thought and moved without discussion toward the shelter of the porch. They sat in the 2 chairs there and watched the rain come across the hills in gray sheets, and it was the most comfortable silence Maggie had inhabited in longer than she could count. This was the thing about Jesse Calloway that she hadn't expected. He was easy to be around. Not in the way of men who filled space with noise and assertion and the constant need to be attended to. Easy in the way of a landscape present, solid, requiring nothing from you but your presence in return. She was beginning to understand why that felt dangerous. It was Will who noticed it first. He came into the kitchen one afternoon while Maggie was making bread flour on her hands and her hair, and he stood in the doorway with the look of a man who has something to say and is organizing the courage to say it. Sit down, Will, she said without turning around. He sat. She kept kneading. I want to apologize, he said, properly, not just for Thomas, for you. She said nothing. I was in Stillwater the whole time you were trying to keep the store going. I watched you go from shop to shop trying to find work. I watched the doors close. He looked at his hands. I told myself I couldn't interfere. That you didn't know who I was, that introducing myself would just confuse things. That you were managing. He was quiet for a moment. You weren't managing. Nobody could have managed in those circumstances. And I had more than enough to share. I had wages, I had a roof. I could have helped. I chose not to. Maggie kept working the dough. Outside, she could hear Jesse and the horses. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because you deserve to know the truth about who I am and what I did. He looked up at her. And because I want to do better. I can't undo it, I know that. But I can at least not pretend it didn't happen. She turned and looked at him then. He was younger than she'd first thought, 22, maybe 23. Young enough that his capacity for this kind of honesty still surprised her because it was the kind of honesty that was easier not to arrive at until much later when the comfortable alternatives had run out. Thomas would have forgiven you, she said. I know. His voice was rough. That's the hardest part. She turned back to the bread. Give me time, she said. That's all I'm asking. Don't ask me to be where I'm not yet. Give me time and keep being honest. That I can do, he said. 11 days after Will arrived, Sheriff Ned Holt rode up the ranch road. Alone. Not with deputies, not with the air of official business. He came at dusk when the day's work was winding down, and the three of them were finishing supper. He tied his horse at the post and knocked at the door, which was not what a man on official business did. Jesse answered. Maggie and Will both stayed inside, but within earshot. Calloway. Holt's voice was low, careful. I need a word. You're having one. A pause. I came alone. I can see that. I'm not here on Voss's business. Another pause longer. I'm here because I've got a problem, and I thought maybe you did too, and I wondered if we might have the same problem. Jesse said nothing. He knows the widow's alive, Holt said. He knows she's here. He's been patient because he's been putting something together, making sure he has enough force to end this definitively, no loose ends. He's been sending for men from across the territory. The sheriff's voice dropped further. He sent for 12. The last 4 arrived in Stillwater this morning. Inside the kitchen, Maggie and Will exchanged a look. Why are you telling me this? Jesse said. A long silence. When Holt spoke again, something in his voice had changed, something underneath the careful authority of a lawman, something that sounded almost like a man who had been tired for a very long time. Because I'm not entirely without conscience, whatever you may think of me. He paused. And because I know that what happens next is going to come out. All of it. There are people who know about the land office business, the widow clearly. You, that cowboy who's been staying here. And Thomas Cole made a copy of those documents before he died. He said this flatly as if he had known for some time. I don't know where it is, but I know it exists. And when Voss moves on this ranch, it's going to bring the kind of attention neither of us can afford to have. Jesse let the silence sit. I'm not asking for anything, Holt said. I'm telling you what's coming. And I'm telling you that if a federal examiner were to receive certain documentation in the next few days, before everything comes apart, there might be men willing to cooperate fully in exchange for reduced exposure. He cleared his throat. That's all I'm saying. The silence stretched out. You can go, Sheriff, Jesse said finally. Holt went. They heard his horse pick its way back down the road in the growing dark. Jesse came back inside and stood at the table and looked at the two of them with an expression that was not quite readable. He knows about the document, Maggie said. He's been waiting, Jesse said, trying to figure out how to get ahead of it without admitting what he's done. He's panicking. He sat down slowly, which means we're out of time. Maggie thought about what Holt had said, a federal examiner, the document in Thomas's handwriting, the names and dates and figures that could end 2 men's freedom. She thought about the land office in Austin, about the letter Thomas had sent that had gotten him killed, about the chain of choices that had led from that letter to the kitchen table where the 3 of them now sat. We need to get the document to Austin, she said. We need to do 2 things at once, Jesse said. Get the document out and deal with what's coming here. Because Voss is going to move whether we're ready or not, and if we send one of us to Austin, that leaves 2 to handle 12 men. 3 to handle 12 is better than 2, Will said. Jesse looked at him. You rode all night to get here and you've been working cattle for 11 days straight. You sure you've got another fight in you? Will Donovan met his eyes. I owe this family a debt, he said. Let me start paying it. Something in Jesse's expression settled the quiet respect of one man for another man's decision. He turned to Maggie. I'm going to send a letter to the federal land office in Austin tonight. I know a man who can carry it fast and quiet, rides the mail route twice a week. He'll have it there in 3 days. He paused. And then we prepare for what's coming. When, she asked. A day. maybe 2. He looked at her steadily. You could still leave. Take the document yourself, ride for Austin. No. She said it without heat, but without any flexibility in it either. This is my fight. Thomas died for that document. I'm not leaving before I see it means something. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Then we'd better get started. The next 2 days were a kind of suspended time. The stretched, luminous quality of hours lived at the edge of something. They prepared. Jesse walked the property one more time methodically, the way a man takes inventory before something important. He showed Will the defensive positions. The stone walls of the house, the barn loft with its clear sight lines, the water barrels positioned against fire. He taught Maggie to shoot properly in sessions behind the barn, correcting her grip and her breathing, with the patient precision of someone who understood that the difference between knowing and knowing well was everything. Her hands had shaken the first time she fired. By the second session, they were steady. By the end of the third, she could put 3 shots in a tight cluster at 40 yards, and Will Donovan, watching from the fence, had said, "You've got iron in you," and she had not argued the point. In the evenings, the 3 of them sat at the kitchen table and talked through scenarios, where to position, what to watch for, how to communicate across the distance between house and barn without shouting. Jesse sketched the property on a piece of paper, and they moved around it with their eyes anticipating approaches, anticipating problems the way chess players think 3 moves ahead. It was on the second evening, the last before the men came, that Maggie found herself unable to sleep. She was sitting on the porch in the deep middle of the night, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars wheel overhead in their slow, enormous arc, when she heard the screen door, and Jesse came out and sat in the other chair without asking. He had a cup of coffee that he handed to her, and then sat with his hands empty on his knees. They sat in silence for a long time. "I need to tell you something," he said at last. "All right. When I came to Stillwater that day, the day I found you, I wasn't planning to be there. I'd been to the county seat, had some business with a feed supplier, and I was taking the long way back because I wanted to think." He looked at the stars. "I almost took the other road. Almost didn't come through town at all." Maggie said nothing. "I think about that," he said, "the particular luck of it, how close it came to not happening." A pause. "I've done a lot of things I regret, Maggie, things I can't undo, but stopping that day, that's not one of them. Whatever comes tomorrow, I need you to know that." She turned to look at him in the starlight. His profile was still against the dark jaw, set eyes forward, but something in the set of his shoulders that was different from the hardened readiness of the past 2 days, something more exposed. "Jesse," she said. He turned. "I know you see Sarah sometimes when you look at me." She said it gently without accusation. "I know that's part of why you stopped, and I know that must make things complicated for you." He didn't deny it. "At first," he said carefully, "at first maybe, but—" He stopped, started again. "I've been alone for 10 years, Maggie. I thought I was finished with wanting things, finished with hoping for anything I couldn't see from one day to the next." He looked at her steadily. "And then you started getting better, and you started making this place into somewhere a person could actually live, and I realized I hadn't been finished at all. I'd just been waiting." The night was very still around them. "I'm not Sarah," she said. "No." Something in his voice was certain. "You're not. You're someone I didn't expect to find, and I don't quite know what to do with that yet. But I know the difference between a ghost and a person, and you are very much a person." A pause. "I'm not asking you for anything. Not tonight, not when we don't know what tomorrow brings. I just wanted you to know." She reached over and put her hand over his. His was rougher, older, still. They stayed like that for a longer time, their hands resting together on the arm of the chair, watching the stars move, listening to the horses shift in the corral. Not speaking, not needing to. And when the first pale light began to seep into the east, and it was time to go inside and be ready, Maggie felt something she had not expected to feel the night before a fight. Grateful. Grateful for the specific accident of roads taken and not taken, for the particular grace of having been found by someone capable of seeing her. Whatever tomorrow brought, she had been seen. She had been chosen. In a world that had spent 14 months telling her she was worth nothing, she had found a man who had bet his life on the opposite being true. That was enough. If it came to nothing more, then that it was enough. Will came to find her just before dawn. He stood in the kitchen doorway with his hat in his hands, which was not how he usually stood, and she knew before he spoke that whatever he had to say, he had been building to it for days. I need you to know something, he said, before this starts. She poured him coffee and pushed it across the table. Sit. He sat, wrapped his hands around the cup. I was Thomas's witness, he said, when he made that copy. He came to me 2 weeks before he died and told me what he'd found, the land records, the false signatures, all of it. He said he needed someone to hold a copy in case something happened to him. He trusted me with it. He looked at the table. And I did what I was asked. I kept it safe all this time. That part I got right. Yes. But I didn't do the rest of it. I didn't go for help. I didn't find a way to use it. I just held on to it and told myself the time wasn't right, or that the right opportunity would come, or that I was protecting it by not acting on it too soon. He looked up. I was a coward. I called it caution, but it was cowardice. Maggie studied him across the table. He looked like Thomas. She realized not in his face, which was different, but in something about the way he held himself when he was being honest. A certain quality of stillness. Thomas had gone still like that when he was saying something that mattered. Thomas told me about you, she said. Will's head came up. In one of his letters, he had a half-brother, younger, that he'd met as an adult. He said he was proud of the man you were becoming. That you had his father's stubbornness and his mother's sense, which he said was the best possible combination. She watched his face change. He was glad you'd found each other. Will Donovan looked at the table for a moment. When he looked up, his eyes were bright. I should have been there when it mattered. You're here now. She stood, reached across, and squeezed his shoulder, once brief and firm, the way her mother used to do when she was small and afraid and needed reminding of what she was made of. Thomas would be glad of that, too. Outside, the first birds were starting. Dawn was coming. They came at mid-morning. 14 of them riding in from the south in a loose formation, confident, unhurried the way men ride when they believe the outcome is already settled. Maggie counted them from the front window of the house, her rifle resting against the wall beside her, her breathing measured and deliberate, the way Jessie had taught her. Breathe in, hold, let the air out slow. Don't rush anything. Jessie was on the porch behind the water trough he had reinforced with extra planking over the past 2 days. Will was in the barn loft with a clear line of sight to the main approach. Maggie was at the front window where the stone walls were thickest, where she could cover the house's approach while keeping Jessie in her peripheral view. They had gone over every scenario 3 times. They knew what to do. That didn't make the sight of 14 armed men riding toward the ranch feel anything other than what it was. Harlan Voss rode at the front. She recognized his horse first, a fine gray with an arrogant carriage that matched its rider, and then the man himself sitting his saddle with the ease of someone who has never seriously considered the possibility of his own defeat. He wore a dark coat despite the heat. His hat was new. He looked like a man arriving to collect a debt, not to burn a house down. The riders stopped about 100 yards out. Voss dismounted and walked forward alone, stopping at what he calculated to be a comfortable distance. Calloway, his voice carried easily across the yard. I know you can hear me. Jessie rose slowly from behind the trough. He kept it between himself and Voss, but he stood. I hear you. You know why I'm here. This doesn't need to be complicated. Voss's tone was the tone of a man explaining something simple to someone slow. Send out the widow and walk away from this. You've got no dog in this fight. She's not your wife, not your kin. You stopped what was happening in town, fine. You've done your good deed. Now step back and let me handle my business. Your business is trying to bury a woman for refusing you, Jessie said. And before that, your business was killing her husband because he found out what you've been stealing from this county for the past 6 years. A pause. I've seen the document, Voss, names, dates, figures, Thomas Cole's handwriting, yours and Holt's signatures on things that were never legal. It's already been sent to Austin. A beat of silence, then bluffing. Am I? It wasn't a question. Voss's expression shifted just slightly, just enough. He was recalculating. She could see it from the window. Send the woman out, he said again. We burn this place down and everything in it, and that's the end of it. You walk away with your life. That's a better offer than you deserve. Here's my offer, Jessie said. You turn those men around and ride out of this county tonight. You don't come back. You don't go after anyone connected to this. you just leave. He looked at Voss without blinking. Or you find out what this place cost to build and how hard I'll fight to keep it. Voss looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled, cold, deliberate, turned, and walked back to his men. He gave a short signal. They spread out. Here we go, Jesse said low and even. Remember what I told you. Make your shots count. The first shot came from Voss's side, a ranging shot that threw up dirt 15 feet in front of the house testing. Will answered from his barn loft, and one of the riders yanked his horse sideways, clutching his arm. Then everything happened at once. Maggie had understood gunfire in the abstract. She had heard it before: hunting shots, the distant percussion of men proving something to each other across a field. She had not been inside it. The difference was absolute. The sound was not loud, the way thunder is loud, rolling and distant, and eventually gone. It was everywhere, immediate, personal, the crack of rifles and the whip snap of bullets, finding stone and wood, and underneath it, the constant pounding awareness that every one of those sounds was someone trying to kill the people she was with. She did not freeze. She had been afraid she would freeze. Had lain awake 2 nights imagining it, the moment when her body refused what her mind was asking of it. But when the first volley came, her training took hold with a completeness that surprised her. She rose from below the windowsill, found her first target, a rider circling toward the house, led him slightly the way Jesse had shown her, and fired. The horse reared. The man went sideways. She didn't wait to see more, was already tracking the next one. 2 on the left, she heard Will shout from the barn. Jesse moved. She heard his rifle fire twice in rapid succession. They worked in the pattern they had planned, covering in each other, communicating position, maintaining fire discipline, when the urge was to spray and hope. Jesse had said it a dozen times during their preparations: controlled fire beats volume every time. Make them think about it. Make them worried about what they can't see. For 20 minutes it held. Then Voss's men began to adapt. They had professional patience. She could see it in the way they repositioned, finding cover and using it properly, concentrating their fire to suppress the defenders while others moved. 2 men made for the barn, using the building's angle to stay out of Will's line of fire from above. Fletcher 2 on your left, she screamed, forgetting the name, using the word that meant the barn. She was already lining up the shot herself, taking one man at the knee, watching him drop. But the second made the barn wall and pressed himself flat against it. Can't get an angle, Will shouted down. She watched the man at the barn wall reach into his coat, pull out something, a bottle with a rag stuffed in the neck. Kerosene. She did not think. She stood full height in the window, fully exposed, completely visible, sighted down the barrel at the bottle, not the man, and fired. The bottle exploded in his hand. He screamed and dropped, rolling in the dirt, the kerosene splashing harmlessly across the ground, the fire never catching. Good shot, Jesse said from somewhere behind her. And then they were being pushed back. Voss still had 8 men minimum, all of them behind cover now, all of them patient content, to maintain suppressing fire and wait the defenders out. Siege arithmetic. Time was on their side. They had water and they had numbers, and they had the simple grinding advantage of being able to outlast 3 people in a stone house. We can't stay defensive, Will called from the loft. They'll just wear us down. Jesse came up behind her. She hadn't heard him move. The gunfire had masked everything else. Plan B, he said low, close to her ear. On my signal, stop shooting. All of us. Let them think they've got us pinned. And if they rush, then we were losing anyway. At least this way we control when it happens. She looked at him. He met her eyes. Trust me, he said. Always, she said, and was faintly surprised to realize she meant it completely. The silence when it came was eerie. 3 rifles went quiet at once. For a long moment, nothing happened, just the sound of the wind and her own heartbeat and the distant shifting of horses. Then Voss's voice calling orders to his men. She could hear the change in the quality of the approach, cautious at first, boots on gravel, then more confident as the silence held. She pressed herself against the wall beside the window. Rifle up, waiting. Through the gap at the window's edge, she could see them coming. 4 men toward the house, 3 toward the barn. Spread out but moving forward, out from behind cover, now using the open yard in the way that people use open space when they believe it's safe. Now, Jesse said. All 3 of them opened fire at once. At close range against men who had stepped out of cover, the effect was devastating. Two of the men advancing on the house went down before they could react. A third took a shot to the shoulder and spun backward. The fourth dove for the ground, but Jesse's second shot was faster. Near the barn, we'll drop two more. 6 men down in under 10 seconds. The remaining riders, 4 left, maybe 5 broke from cover and ran for their horses. Voss was screaming at them, red-faced furious, but the fight had gone out of his hired guns. They hadn't signed on to die for someone else's land dispute against a woman who wasn't supposed to be able to shoot back. But one man hadn't run, the one who had been behind the water barrel when the engagement started, the one she had spooked off his horse with her first shot, whose position she had lost track of in the chaos. He had used the noise and confusion of their ambush to circle around, come at the house from the side, get through the unbolted back door. She heard the door, spun. He was already inside, pistol leveled. She had a rifle. At this distance, in a small room, the lever action was wrong too long to bring around too slow. Her mind registered all of this in a fraction of a second, along with the absolute certainty that she was out of time. Jesse was moving before she fully processed the threat. He came from her left, threw himself sideways into the gunman with everything he had, catching him mid-aim, slamming them both into the wall. The pistol fired. The shot went into the ceiling. Plaster dust rained down. They went to the floor together, thrashing, and Maggie had the pistol from her belt in her hand now, but she couldn't get an angle. They were too close together. She couldn't risk. Jesse got his forearm across the man's throat. Pressed. The gunman's legs kicked. His hand scrabbled at Jesse's face. 5 seconds. 10. Then he went still. Jesse held on for 5 more seconds, making sure. Then he released and stood. His hands were shaking. "All right," she asked. Her own voice was strange in her ears, too calm, too steady, as if her body hadn't gotten the message yet that the worst of it was over. "Yeah." He bent and picked up the dead man's pistol, handed it to her without comment. "Keep it." Outside, the firing had stopped. She went to the window. 3 horses were disappearing over the South Hill riders bent low in their saddles. Voss sat his gray horse at the edge of the property, staring at the house, and even across the distance, she could feel the malevolence of him, the specific, concentrated rage of a man who has never lost anything he wanted to keep. "This isn't over, Calloway," his voice carried across the yard. "You hear me? This isn't over." "It is for today," Jesse called back, level and quiet. "And if you're smart, it's over for good. Next time, I won't give you the chance to leave." Voss wheeled his horse and galloped after his men. The yard went quiet. Maggie sat down on the floor. She hadn't planned to. Her legs just stopped holding her up all at once, the adrenaline going out of her like water out of a cracked basin. She sat in the middle of the kitchen floor with the pistol in her lap and her hands shaking, now really shaking, and she didn't try to stop them. Jesse came and crouched in front of her. "Hey." His voice was different now, quiet, stripped of the battle readiness. Just him. "Look at me." She looked. "You did good," he said. "You kept your head. You made your shots count. You saved Will's life with that warning, and you saved yourself from that fire." He met her eyes. "You should be proud." "I killed people," she said. "You defended your home, defended your life and the lives of the men who were standing with you." He didn't look away. "There's a difference. And yeah, it's going to feel like this for a while. Like you want to be sick and you want to scream and you can't quite believe any of it happened. That's right. That's what it's supposed to feel like." Will came in through the front door, rifle over his shoulder, a cut above his eyebrow, where a splinter of wood had caught him. He was grinning despite it. "We're alive," he said, and sounded genuinely amazed. "For now," Jesse said. He stood. "Voss isn't done. He'll regroup, find more men, try again." He looked at both of them. "We need to end this tonight, before he has the chance." Maggie got to her feet. "Stillwater." "Stillwater," he confirmed. 3 of us against the whole town," Will said. "Against Voss," Jesse corrected. "The town is different. The town is people who've been afraid for long enough that they've forgotten they have a choice." He looked at them both. "It's time to remind them." They rode at sunset, 3 figures against the sky going red and violet above the hills. Nobody spoke much on the road. There wasn't much that needed saying. They had said what mattered over the past weeks in kitchens and gardens and on porches in the dark, and what was left could only be done, not described. They rode through the cooling evening, and when the lights of Stillwater came into view in the valley below, Maggie felt something settle inside her that she hadn't expected to feel. Not fear, not the cold animal dread that had owned the last 14 months of her life every time she had thought about Harlan Voss and what he represented. Something steadier, something that felt like, I know what I'm doing and I know why, and I know what it's worth. They tied their horses 2 buildings down from the Lucky Diamond and went in on foot. The saloon was lit up and busy, the usual end-of-day tradesmen with their drinks and their card games, the piano in the corner doing its best. And there at the table in the back, where he always sat when he was conducting business, was Harlan Voss. He had 4 men with him, the ones who had made it back from the ranch. His face when he looked up and saw them walk through the doors was something Maggie would remember for the rest of her life. Shock first, then rage, then something darker and colder, the expression of a man doing rapid calculations. The room went quiet, the way rooms go quiet when someone reads the atmosphere correctly. Jesse stepped forward. Harlan, Voss rose slowly. You've got more nerve than sense. You're going to hear me out, Jesse said, because what I'm about to offer you is the last fair chance you're going to get. I don't take offers from your name, Maggie said clearly from Jesse's left, is on a document in Thomas Cole's handwriting that was delivered to the federal land office in Austin 3 days ago, along with Sheriff Holt's name, along with 6 years of fraudulent transactions, forged signatures, and stolen land. She let that sit for a moment. The examiner who received it sent a telegram to the territorial marshal this morning. He'll be in Stillwater within the week. The silence in the saloon was absolute. Voss looked at her, at Jesse, at the document. She was now holding the copy, the one Thomas had died to protect, the one Will had guarded for months out of guilt and loyalty in equal parts. She laid it on the nearest table, face up where anyone in the room could read it. Your choice, Jesse said. You leave tonight, you take what you can carry, and you go somewhere far away and you never come back. The document still goes through. We can't stop that, and we wouldn't if we could. But you're a free man, and free men have options. He paused. Or you stay, and when the marshal gets here, he finds you. Voss's hand went for his gun. Before it cleared leather, Jesse had his own out and leveled. Don't, Jesse said. The men at Voss's table had risen. Will had his rifle. The standoff was a held breath, a single wrong move from catastrophe. Then the saloon door opened. Sheriff Ned Holt walked in with both deputies. Maggie's heart dropped, and then she watched Holt's face and she understood. He looked old. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. He looked at Voss, and he looked at Jesse, and he looked at the document on the table, and for a long moment nobody moved. Holt, Voss said, with the reflexive confidence of a man calling on an asset, Good, deal with this. Holt looked at him. I've been thinking, the sheriff said slowly, about what a man is willing to do to keep his freedom. He looked at his deputies, then at Voss. Turns out there's a limit. He drew his badge from his vest, held it in his palm for a moment, then set it on the nearest table. I already sent my own statement to Austin. 3 days ago, told them everything, the land transactions, the Cole killing, all of it. He met Voss's eyes. My name's on that document, same as yours. Only difference is I'm the one who told the truth about it first. Voss's face went white. You. His voice was barely above a whisper. Take him, Holt said to his deputies. Voss's men looked at each other, looked at the deputies, looked at the rifle Will was holding, and Jesse's pistol, and the quiet, implacable expression on Maggie Cole's face. The arithmetic was clear. Whatever Voss was paying them, it wasn't enough for this. They stepped back. Voss looked at the deputies approaching, looked at Jesse, then he looked at Maggie, and in that look, she saw everything she needed to see. The recognition that this woman, this widow he had beaten in the street and written off as nothing, had done what his wealth and his influence and his 14 armed men had not been able to do. She had refused to be destroyed, and in refusing, she had destroyed him. His hand moved fast, desperate, going for the gun one final time. Jesse fired. The shot took Voss through the shoulder, spinning him around, dropping him hard. His gun clattered across the floor. He was down and cursing and clutching his arm, and the deputies were on him before he could do anything further. He drew, Jesse said calmly, holstering his pistol. Everyone in this room saw it. We did, Holt said. Self-defense. Clear. He looked at the deputy Ben. Get him to the doctor, then into a cell. They left the saloon before Voss was fully dragged out. Behind them, the room was beginning to find its voice again. Low, urgent conversation, the particular buzz of people trying to make sense of a thing they had just witnessed. Maggie stood in the street outside and breathed the cool night air and felt the adrenaline leave her body in one long, slow exhalation like a tide going out. Mrs. Cole, she turned. A young woman was standing in the saloon doorway. Mary Chen, who ran the boarding house on the south end of Maine, who had turned Maggie away when she had been down to her last $3 and nowhere else to go. I need to say something, Mary said. Her voice was unsteady. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. When you needed help, when you needed a room, when you were training to hold yourself together after Thomas died, I turned you away because I was afraid of what Voss might do if he found out I'd helped you. I chose my own safety over doing right. Her eyes were bright. I've hated myself for it since the day you left. Maggie looked at her for a moment. You weren't the only one who made that choice, she said. Not as an excuse, but as a fact. This whole town made it. I understand why. Fear is a real thing, and Voss made sure everyone had reason to feel it. She paused. But I also know that the people in that street the day I was beaten, the people who watched and said nothing, you all have to live with that. And the only way to carry it is to make different choices going forward. Others had come out now, the butcher who had refused her credit, the dry goods store owner who had watched her shop without selling to her, a handful of cowboys who had been in the street that September morning. They stood in the lamplight with the particular discomfort of people who know they owe a debt they're not sure how to pay. I meant what I said inside, Maggie told them. Words are easy. Doing is hard. I'll judge this town by what it does now, by whether justice actually sticks this time, by whether you show up when there's someone else who needs what I needed, by whether the next person Voss would have victimized finds a town that protects them instead. She felt Jesse's hand at her back light steady, just present. She straightened. Let's go home, she said. 6 weeks passed before the letter arrived. Maggie was in the garden when she heard the courier's horse on the road. She had been planting winter vegetables, her hands in the earth, the smell of turned soil around her. She watched Jesse come out of the barn and Will come down from the north fence, and the three of them converged on the yard as the courier dismounted and produced an envelope with the territorial court seal. Jesse broke the seal, read. His face was unreadable. Well, Maggie said when she couldn't hold the question any longer. He looked up, and his eyes held something she had not seen in them before. Not the controlled grief, not the wariness she had first known, but something lighter. Something that looked like the specific relief of a man who has been holding his breath for 30 years and finally exhaled. Guilty, he said, on all counts. 20 years federal territorial prison. His assets seized and applied to restitution for the families he defrauded. He handed her the letter. It's done, Maggie, he's done. She read it herself, read it twice. Read Thomas's name where it appeared in the charges, Thomas Cole deceased, whose evidence formed the foundation of this prosecution, and felt something shift in her chest that she couldn't have named precisely. But that felt like it mattered. You mattered. What you did, what you tried to do, what you died to protect it mattered. She folded the letter carefully and held it against her chest. Will cleared his throat. I'll go check those fence posts, he said, and left with the diplomatic grace he had been steadily developing since that first night at the kitchen table. When he was gone, Jesse came to stand beside her. You all right? He asked. I think so. She looked at the letter in her hands. I spent so long being afraid of him, so long organizing every day around what he might do next. Now that it's over, I don't quite know who I am without it, without the fear. That sounds like someone who has the time to figure it out, Jesse said, without the pressure of figuring it out in a hurry. She looked up at him. Stay, he said, simply, not asking her to decide anything beyond the next horizon, not asking her to be anyone other than who she was in this moment. Not because you have nowhere else to go, you've earned the right to go anywhere you want, but because this place is better with you in it, because I'm better with you in it, and because I think maybe you know that. The hills stretched away in every direction, brown and vast and full of the particular silence of open country, the silence that doesn't oppress you, but holds you, that makes room. I know that, she said. He reached out and took her hand, and she let him, and they stood together in the afternoon sun, with Thomas Cole's vindication against her chest and the future spread open in front of them. And Maggie felt something she had stopped believing in sometime in those terrible 14 months. She felt like herself, not the broken version, not the desperate version, not even the version that had been learning slowly to be strong again. The full version, the one that had been there all along underneath the grief and the fear and the grinding work of just surviving, waiting for enough space and enough time and enough safety to stand all the way up. She was standing all the way up now. They were married in the spring. Not in a church they had, both of them had enough of institutions for a while, and there was something right about the open sky for this particular ceremony. Jesse's land stretching to the hills in every direction. A minister from the county seat who came without being asked too many questions. Will Donovan standing as witness in a new shirt, pretending he didn't have anything in his eye. Sheriff Holt, no longer sheriff, having resigned and cooperated fully with the federal examiner, walking free on reduced charges, but without a badge or a title, came and stood at the back of the small gathering. He didn't speak to either of them. He just stood there, and Maggie decided to let that be enough. Mary Chen came from Stillwater, and the butcher and a few others from town who seemed to be understanding slowly that choices had consequences, and second chances were real things if you treated them right. Jesse said his vows, looking at her the way a man looks at something he did not expect to have and is not taking for granted. She said hers, looking back the same way. Will cheered louder than everyone else combined. And the gathering on the Texas hillside, small and imperfect, and patched together from the ruins of other things, became something that was entirely its own. It was on a Wednesday in October, 7 months after the wedding, that everything changed again. Maggie was hanging laundry when she heard the wagon coming up the road. A woman driving it, elderly, deliberate, navigating the ruts with the careful attention of someone who was not accustomed to driving alone. Beside her on the bench sat a young woman of perhaps 14, dark-haired and straight-backed, who was looking around at the ranch with the particular intensity of someone seeing something for the first time that they have been thinking about for a long time. Jesse came out of the barn. He stopped. Maggie didn't understand what she was seeing in his face, had never seen anything like it. He went completely still in a way that was different from his usual stillness, different from battle readiness or grief or anger. He went still the way a person goes still when the world suddenly reorganizes itself around a fact they didn't know existed. The old woman set the brake and climbed down from the wagon with the help of a fence post. "Jesse Calloway," she said, "I'm Ruth Hagen. You don't know me, but I know who you are, and I've known for about 8 years that I owed you something I wasn't sure how to give." The girl on the wagon seat didn't move. She was looking at Jesse with eyes that were dark and still and very familiar. Maggie had seen those eyes before on a winter evening, in a story told on a ranch porch, in a description of a 6-year-old who followed her father everywhere, seen in Why the Sky Turned Red at Night. "Her name is Emma," Ruth Hagen said. "I found her the morning after the fire. She'd been hiding in the root cellar under the house the stone held, and the smoke didn't reach her. I took her to town, but you'd already gone and nobody knew where. I kept her. Raised her as best I could." She looked at the old woman's hands. "I was afraid all those years of what it would mean to find you. I didn't know who you'd become. I didn't want to hand her over to someone who might not be." She stopped. Jesse hadn't moved. "Daddy," the girl on the wagon said. Just that word. Her voice was quiet and certain, not a question. Jesse Calloway, who had survived Kansas and 3 years of hunting a man through 3 territories and a decade of solitary grief, and Harlan Voss and everything else the world had put in front of him. Jesse Calloway put his hand over his mouth and sat down on the ground. Maggie went to him. Not to hold him up, he didn't need that. Just to be beside him the way you stand beside a person when they are in the middle of something enormous. Emma climbed down from the wagon with the decisive movement of a girl who has made up her mind about something. She walked across the yard with her mother's gait, the particular way of a person who moves like she's certain there's something just over the next hill. She stopped in front of Jesse and looked at him. "You look like I thought you would," she said, "from the picture Mama kept." Jesse looked up at her. He said nothing for a long time. Then he reached up and took her hand in both of his. "You have her eyes," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I could see it from the wagon." Emma sat down beside him in the dirt. and Maggie stepped back to give them space this conversation that had been waiting 10 years to happen in a language that didn't need anyone else to translate it. She went to stand by Ruth Hagen, who was watching with the expression of someone doing something that is both a relief and a loss at the same time. "Thank you," Maggie said, "for keeping her, for raising her well. She's a good girl." Ruth's voice was steady. "Better than she had any right to be given everything." She looked at Maggie. "He's lucky he found someone." "I'm the one who got lucky," Maggie said, "though I'd argue we both did." In the yard, Jesse and Emma were talking quietly. She couldn't hear the words, and didn't need to. She could see the shape of it, two people in the middle of something enormous, beginning the slow, complicated, necessary work of finding each other across a decade of distance. It would take time. It would not be simple. There were 10 years of absence that couldn't be explained away, could only be accepted and worked around, and slowly, carefully transformed into something that was its own kind of wholeness. But they were starting, and starting in Maggie's experience was almost always the hardest part. Will Donovan built himself a house on the north end of the property that fall. Not because anyone asked him to leave, Jesse had been clear about that, and Maggie clearer still. He built it because he had decided somewhere in the weeks after Voss's arrest that he was done moving, done picking up and riding on whenever things got complicated, done being someone who showed up too late and did too little and told himself afterward that the circumstances hadn't allowed for more. He had a piece of land now. He had people who knew his history and kept him anyway. He had the work of building something which was, as far as he could tell, the closest thing to meaning that a person could put their hands on directly. Emma Calloway arrived at the main ranch house for breakfast every morning at 7 and left for home, which was slowly transitioning from Ruth Hagen's place in town to the room she was given at the ranch at sunset each evening, and in between she worked the land and asked questions about cattle and horses and fencing and weather and everything else with the particular intensity of a person who is making up for lost time. She and Jesse found their way to each other, slowly the way rivers find the sea. Not directly, not without detours, but with the absolute certainty of water moving toward the place it belongs. There were evenings where they sat on the porch and didn't say much. There were other evenings where they talked until the lamp burned down, and Maggie would wake in the night to hear Jesse's voice still going, patient and careful, filling in 10 years of absence, one story at a time. She didn't try to rush it. Some things needed the time they needed. And watching Jesse discover that the guilt he had carried for a decade, the conviction that he had failed his daughter, by surviving when she supposedly hadn't, was based on a lie that time and one brave old woman had finally corrected Maggie, understood something that she had been feeling toward, but hadn't quite put words to. She had thought in Stillwater that survival was the best she could hope for, that the work of her life was simply to continue existing in the face of circumstances that wanted her not to. She had thought that getting through each day was the whole of the project, but survival was not the whole of it. Survival was just the prerequisite. The real work was what came after the deliberate daily choosing to build something from whatever was left, to take the broken pieces and the damaged people and the complicated, unsentimental love that grew up between them and make something that was worth the price of getting there. She thought about Thomas, about the hope he had carried west like a lantern. He had not been wrong, he had just not lived to see how the hope would ultimately be honored. Not by the store they had planned, not by the life they had imagined, but by a stone house on a Texas hillside, by a girl who laughed without reservation, by a man who had stopped running, by the quiet ongoing miracle of people choosing each other. "I think you'd be glad," she told him sometimes in the wordless way of speaking to the dead. "I think you'd be glad of all of it." 5 years after Jesse Calloway lifted a woman from the dirt of a Texas street and changed the direction of both their lives, the ranch had become something neither of them had planned and both of them had needed. They took in people. It had started almost by accident, a woman from the county who had left a bad situation and had nowhere to go. Then a young man whose family had been wiped out by fever. Then a former soldier who had come back from the war with nothing but damage and no idea what to do with either. Each of them came for different reasons and stayed for different lengths of time and left having learned some version of the same thing, that you were not what happened to you, that you could be broken down to nothing and still find your way back, that sometimes the people who saw you best were the ones who had also been broken, because they knew what the pieces were supposed to look like. Emma grew into a young woman who could ride and shoot and keep accounts and argue theology and identify 15 species of native grass by sight. She had her mother's gait and her father's patience and her own particular laugh that could be heard from across the property on a still day. She and Jesse had found the thing they had needed to find, not a replacement for the years they'd lost, but a life that honored them. And on the evenings when the work was done and Emma had gone to her room and Will was in his house across the north field, Jesse and Maggie would sit on the porch and watch the stars come out over Texas and remember how they had started. Do you ever wonder when Maggie asked one such evening, her head against his shoulder, what would have happened if you'd taken the other road the day you came through Stillwater? Yes, he said. What do you think? He was quiet for a moment. The cricket sound filled the night around them. A horse moved in the corral. I think you would have found your way out eventually, he said. You were already more than they knew. The town would have lost. He paused. But I don't think about it much. The other road. He turned to look at her. I think about the road I took. I think about what it led to. She lifted her head and kissed him, slow and deliberate, the kind of kiss that belongs to people who have stopped being afraid that the good things will be taken away, who have learned to live inside them without waiting for the catch. When they stopped, she rested her forehead against his. Thank you, she said. For what? For stopping. She looked at him in the starlight. For seeing me. You were worth seeing. He said. You were always worth seeing. Margaret Cole had been beaten in the street and left for dead in a town that had decided she wasn't worth the trouble of caring about. She had lost her husband and her home, and everything she had planned had spent 14 months being slowly ground down by poverty and exclusion and the daily accumulation of doors closed in her face. And then a stranger had ridden into town at the wrong time on the wrong road and made the one choice that changed everything. She had survived. More than survived, she had built. She had found love again, not the same love, not a replacement for what she'd lost, but something entirely its own, something she had earned. She had given Thomas's death the meaning he had meant for it to have. She had helped give a girl back her father and a father back his daughter. She had made a home out of a place that had been in absence and filled it with people who needed what she had found and was glad to give. The stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had looked down on Stillwater, and on a woman bleeding in the dirt and on a man deciding whether to stop. The same stars that would go on looking down long after all of them were dust. But tonight they were here, alive, present, certain of each other. And that, as Margaret Cole Calloway had learned in the particular school of hard and necessary things, was not a small amount. That was not something to be taken lightly or passed over or treated as less than what it was. That was everything, the end.